rioting is down with 15.1%, and robbery at non-residential premises with 23.4%. My worry there is still house robbery at residential premises, which is only down with 0.4%, and that's actually basically only a stabilization. So maybe they should do more on that in that field.
Freedom Park in South Africa, together with ZA Central Registry and Registry Africa, will host a groundbreaking Pan-African campaign. It will take place on Sunday under the theme Silencing the Guns, Let the Drums Roll. The event will bring together all 55 African Union member states in a symbolic gesture of unity and peace. Acting Executive Dean of the Thabo Mbeki African School of International and Public Relations Affairs, Professor Edith Paswana, is currently in Tanzania.
So the day holds significant importance for various reasons. The first one being its historical significance. You will remember that this day reminds Africans about unity and solidarity. When we were fighting, we were in the trenches against colonialism, against apartheid, and against slavery, because we came together as Africans. And this day symbolizes that continent's unity in the face of historical challenges.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has warned of a deteriorating situation in South Sudan following a sharp increase in hostilities between government forces and various militias. Volker Turk said that all parties must urgently pull back from the brink and observe the peace agreement signed in 2018. Medical charity Doctors Without Borders says that there is a risk of a public health catastrophe in the Ethiopian town of Mata, where up to 85,000 refugees have fled from heavy fighting in South Sudan's Upper Nile state. The BBC's Anne Soy has further details.
Doctors Without Borders says the local infrastructure in Matar, Western Ethiopia, is stretched beyond capacity. It warned that a health disaster could be imminent following a resurgence of waterborne diseases like cholera and acute watery diarrhea. Many of the refugees have endured serious food shortages, and nearly a tenth of their children are now showing signs of severe acute malnutrition. Malaria rates are also very high in the area.
A military helicopter has crashed near the village of Narishkino in Russia's Oryol region, killing the crew, citing the Moscow military district headquarters. The preliminary cause of the crash was reported to be a technical malfunction. Regional Governor Andrei Klitschkov said that there were no casualties among the local population and that fire crews were working at the scene. Let's recap the top story. At least 30 mine workers have resurfaced from underground at South Africa's Sibanye Stillwater's Kloof Gold Mine in Western Area, Johannesburg, this afternoon. For any news that you would like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I am Nolutando Butelezi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
It is a very good afternoon to you, Senegal. Good afternoon, Ghana, Somalia, Eritrea. Good afternoon, Ethiopia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Eswatini. Good afternoon to you, Tanzania. Good afternoon, Africa. Welcome to Africa in Business on Channel Africa. I'm Thami Ngubeni. This is where you get the African perspective. It's where we meet to look at the latest in news, sport and business. Coming to you live from our SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. A lot in store for you today, including a look at Zambia's food prices. Some good news coming out of Zambia with a decline in some of their staple food prices. We'll also be looking at the rail situation in South Africa as Transnet gets a $2.8 billion guarantee facility. How far will that go, considering the fact that they are $7.7 billion in debt? That is, of course, by the end of March 2024. As usual, we have our business roundup with Victor Khumuswana a bit later on this afternoon, as we also find out about, guess what, the last African colony that has been handed over by the United Kingdom. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
Now, South Africa's Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation says it needs about $34 million as seed funding for establishing an asset management company that will have control of the country's strategic state-owned enterprises. The company, which will be under the direct control of the president, is meant to professionalize SOEs and help them become profitable. So far, this has not gone down well, with the public and parliamentarians having more questions than answers. Dimakatso Lishuru has the details.
The Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, housed in the presidency, is pushing through with an idea that was formed under the late Minister Pravin Gordhan to deal with governance issues and lack of accountability. They came up with a state asset management company, SAMSOC, that will merge core SOEs like Eskom, Transnet and SAA under one umbrella and under the control of the president himself. It is hoped that this, coupled with minimal political interference, may at last see SOEs profitable and not continue being a burden to the fiscus. SAMSOC, as it is now known, will be established through the National States Enterprises Bill, which has now been rejected by NEDLAC. There are concerns that this company will not adhere to the Public Finance Management Act, PFMA, which has put in place accounting and expenditure standards for public entities. South Africa's largest labour federation, COSATU, is opposed to this bill. Spokesperson Matthew Parks says that they have many concerns, including that diverse SOEs with different mandates and challenges could be a problem for a single company to handle.
We are concerned about exempting SOEs from the PFMA. The PFMA seeks to deal with the issues of corruption. That's important, must be maintained given the extent of corruption that SOEs have experienced. But also the Public Procurement Act seeks to support locally produced goods and local businesses and jobs. That's also critical. The presidency and the department have given us assurances that those provisions will still remain binding upon the SOEs, and that's critical, and that must be further tightened and clarified in the bill.
Bulani Kole, a chief policy analyst at the presidency who made a presentation to Parliament on Friday, says the company will be profitable within 3 years.
The expected outcomes, if the bill gets assented into law, is to see improvement in governance of SOEs that are being depoliticized, and we expect them to be competitive, profitable, but also in the context of the government priority of building a capable, ethical and developmental state, but also contributing to economic growth.
Rise Mzansi Member of Parliament Makashule Ghana wanted assurances that if the $34 million required as seed capital were to be granted, will the company not go cap in hand to Treasury looking for another bailout?
They've asked for seed capital of around about 615 million. They are hoping that in 3 years' time, the holding company will now be run from the dividends of the state-owned companies. Let's be realistic here. The state-owned entities that we are talking about, many of them have been posted a profit in the number of years. But then the presidency makes this bold claim. What is it that gives them so much confidence that in 3 years' time, there will be no need for the fiscus to continue funding the holding company?
Democratic Alliance MP Catherine Christie questioned officials from the presidency on whether this company will not provide an open season for corruption and malfeasance.
Does she not believe or think that there could be even further corruption, mismanagement, malfeasance, political interference with a centralized holding company, which could possibly make it even more opaque and close off the governance of state-owned enterprises from the eyes of South Africans? Does she believe that this very expensive and cumbersome project is necessary, given that these national state-owned enterprises were working perfectly well, efficiently, and without this kind of looting that happened after the early 2000s?
Gole says if the bill is signed into law, there should be an improvement in the governance of SOEs.
Research has shown that establishment of central monitoring agencies reduce both cash flow and contingent liability risk in SOEs. So the bill also proposed the development and implementation of an SOE strategy that is linked to the national priorities.
Chumane Matiwane from the Economic Freedom Fighters raised concern about whether this was not part of an agenda to privatize public entities.
What we are not getting is the rationale for us to have this holding company. For whose interest is it to have this holding company? Is it an agenda to privatize these companies?
Gole said establishing this holding company will not solve all the challenges faced by SOEs, but a start in the right direction. Deliberations are set to continue. For Channel Africa News, I'm Dimakazo Leshoro in Johannesburg.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 13 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time as we turn our focus to South Africa's transport system. The country's transport and finance ministries have approved a $2.8 billion guarantee facility to state-owned railway company Transnet. The entity has been trying to turn around its logistics operations from rail to ports after years of graft and mismanagement. The facility is effective immediately to support Transnet's capital investment program and to enable it to meet its debt obligations, which stood at $7.7 billion at the end of March 2024. For more on this, we're joined on the line by Mielani Mkabela, Director and Chief Economist at Ansuiwa Management Group. A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to African Business. Good to have you with us.
Thanks. My name is Mielani Mkabela, and then I'm the Director and Chief Economist at Ansuiwa Management Group.
Thank you.
Thanks to have you and the listeners.
It's a pleasure, sir. Now, there was a contestation as to whether to extend this bailout to Transnet or not. And there were concerns that this might break the constrained fiscus. You'll remember the challenges that South Africa has had in actually tabling a working budget, with it just recently being passed. So why is the country now extending this facility, given the challenges and the fiscal constraints that it is under?
I think we need to start by understanding that state-owned companies are state companies. So government intervention in state-owned companies wouldn't really be a problem, because infrastructure management and infrastructure operations and maintenance, it is an evolution. It is an ongoing process. So having a capital investment, debt orientation, and at the same time operational funds that can assist Transnet is something that the country needs, because when you don't have that, we will go back to a situation where the ports are not working well. But if you need the ports to be working well, or to have efficiencies in the ports and the ports to adapt to the future of ports, then you are expected to have this capital investment. What can be necessary is Transnet having capabilities in terms of human capital to manage this 51 billion in an effective way, so that every amount that is spent, we see the outcome on it. I think that is the only part, because Transnet has been in capital investment for a long time, but like we have been seeing the great outcomes from that. Probably 15 years when they have been in these capital investment projects that they have been working on. But there is no better outcomes to all these turnaround strategies and capital investment that they are playing on.
Precisely. And is that not, sir, the main area of contention here? And I'm highlighting not just Transnet, but other state-owned companies, the fact that there have been bailouts over the years and really no improvement. One cannot see what the fruit or the returns of that investment has been. What are the conditions or the oversight mechanisms that have been attached to this bailout to ensure that it's not just money down the drain once again?
I think topically, I will only focus on Transnet now because this is the 51 billion that we're talking about. And if we talk about general ones, it will distort the information. And this information is very important to investors, the country, and us being focused on what we are talking about. So the investment, as I highlight, it is critical in terms of improving the ports. For any economic growth to happen in a country, you will need to put investment. And this investment is strategic for us to see the economic growth and employment growth that is expected in an economy. In that aspect, what I have been emphasizing, or what I emphasized in my first statement, is you just need ethical human capital, or ethical and competent human capital to manage this 51 billion and make sure that the outcomes of this 51 billion is helpful in terms of delivering what it is desired for or expected to achieve.
Looking at this $2.8 billion, we'll look at it in the dollars perspective. You mentioned that some is going to go towards operational use and the other towards servicing the debt. What type of split is this going to be? And is Transnet then going to be able to raise enough to address the challenges that it's facing, given the very high debt levels?
You look at March, where you could look at around in the 51 billion in terms of rents, you can look at around 65% going to capital investment as expected. And then you look at around 10, which is 7 to 10 billion going to servicing the debt. And then you look at the remaining amount to look at operations. Because it's three categories in terms of how I understand it. But the critical important of it is to look at the capital investment, which is the infrastructure that they need to procure and install in the ports and other strategic elements that they are using for our rail cargo and logistics.
Public partnerships have been quite key and instrumental in South Africa and really seem to be the strategy that government as well as the private sector are looking at when it comes to major projects and investments in infrastructure. Is there, or who are the private venture capitalists and partners who are going to be partnering with Transnet and the government?
I could say government just need to have a strategic partner that they can go with in this, that as well, not really a triple P partner, but like a triple P partner that as well has an understanding of operating these types of projects, because that makes a lot of things to work easier in terms of procurement. The investor as well, or the co-investor, will have understanding of operating ports or commercial like rail. So from that background, it is more at the competencies of the partner and not just look on money, but like look at both the partners' capabilities in operating these types of projects, at the same time, the value of an investment that they can come up with. And when there is a balance with that, then everything will be fine. But I wouldn't really be a person that could say, I choose for them, or who can be that. There are investors, or we have institutional investors that are having almost around 140 trillion in like assets under like management by institutional investors all over the world. And whoever could be that they can manage the ports. Rail is not new. It has been used all over the world, and there are companies that are manufacturing. There are companies that are as well investing in like rail per se, or operating the ports. So if you have that and the combination of that suits the needs of Transnet, then they can just make such an agreement. But it's not a point of more of me indicating this private firm over this asset management. I don't think that is critical. But a Transnet will have an assessment of the Triple P in terms of the new codes of Triple P that has been raised by National Treasury.
Right.
That suits the whole mechanism.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Mkabela, for your insight and contribution to our conversation this afternoon. Very much appreciated, sir.
Thanks so much, and all the listeners.
Thank you. That's Mielani Mkabela, is Director and Chief Economist at Answisa Management Group. And we do know that there have been a number of challenges that Transnet has been facing over the years, including equipment shortages, maintenance backlogs, as well as infrastructure vandalism. And all of that has contributed to its financial strain, including, of course, years of graft and mismanagement. How far will this 51 billion rand or $2.8 billion this guarantee facility go in addressing not only that, but its $7.7 billion debt? And those numbers, the 7.7, was as of the end of March 2024. It's exactly 23 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. In just a moment, we turn our focus on the agriculture situation in Zambia.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África at newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
Now, political expediency in South Africa has driven the passing of amendments to the Political Party Funding Act by the Parliament earlier this week. This is according to NGO My Vote Counts, which has slammed the move to double the upper limit of donations to political parties from 15 million to 30 million rand, and the threshold for disclosure from 100 to 200,000 rand. MVC says Parliament passed the legislation despite a pending judgment it has brought, which seeks to ensure that every cent donated is declared. Busi Bupela reports.
My Vote Counts has taken a dim view of Parliament passing amendments which allow political parties to receive twice as much in donations, 30 million to the previous 15 million rand. The amendments also permit parties to declare a minimum of 200,000 rand to the previous 100,000. The NGO is at the forefront of a court bid to ensure that independent candidates and political parties alike disclose all donations they receive down to the last cent. MVC's Joel Brechman says the rush to pass the amendments, even as a full bench of the Western Cape High Court considers the matter, speaks to what is driving political parties.
we see this as politically expedient. We see this as political parties favoring secrecy, favoring their own interests and those of their donors over transparency and accountability. We understand that politics is expensive, right? Parties need money to operate and to fulfill their roles in a constitutional democracy. But there has to be a balance between the rights of people to know who funds parties and to limit the influence of private actors in our politics. And it seems to us that there was no urgency to do this.
The amendments have been passed based on a report drafted by the Home Affairs Portfolio Committee. However, it is not all represented political parties that have assented to the amendments in the parliamentary vote earlier this week. Notable in opposition to them were the ATM, Build One South Africa and Action SA. Their concern relates to the amendments doing little to promote transparency and prevent the financial capture of the country's politics. Brechman says Parliament's latest move is inexplicable.
The whole process is irrational. The Parliamentary Budget Office, when it was asked to do research on this process, found that the original limits, there's no justification for them. There's no rational reason as to why those were the original limits. And now what the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs has done, and now what the National Assembly is also complicit in doing, is perpetuating this irrational approach to our political funding limits.
Compliance with the provisions of the Political Party Funding Act has long been a concern amongst parties themselves. Some have pointed at the discrepancy between donations declared and lavish spending on election campaigns by some parties, culminating in calls for a review of the legislation. But the latest amendments may not be what some envisaged as the solution. Home Affairs Portfolio Committee Chair Musa Chabane explains what happens next.
Now that the Parliament has passed this draft resolution, it will be submitted to the President for him to then consider his process and the team in terms of whether the amounts that have been carried by Parliament are sufficient for political party. But I think he will look on various aspects in terms of the Electoral Amendment Act of 2024, in terms of the cost of running political affairs and independent activities. As you know, that now that the Act requires individual to participate as individual. Two, it also look on the inflation. I think we're fully aware that we're pressed on the fiscal. So these are amongst the issues that the President may need to consider. You must also know that the state is unable to fully fund political parties. And that is the reason that inform political parties to source funds from various spectrum.
There are mounting calls for the IEC's political party funding unit to be given more powers to police irregularities pertaining to declarations from political parties. This will form part of the Electoral Management Body's symposium to discuss the country's political party funding dispensation next month. IEC Manager for Political Funding, George Mahlangu.
I hope that this deliberation that is going to take place in June will begin to look at these things, whether do you want the transgressions to be dealt with by the EMB? Because these are two conflicting mandates, right? Because when you go for a political party that transgress the law, or you don't go for it, you are going to be criticized that you are in favor of this political party against the other. I think and hope that these deliberations will begin to look at the two. That is the Commission or is the EMB the right institution to implement political funding?
That was IEC Manager for Political Funding, George Mahlangu, ending that report by Busi Bopela. Brings us to exactly 4:30 p.m. Central African Time as we head over to the markets desk, where Nosipho Zuma is standing by with the latest market indicators.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. In your business indicators this hour, $1 is trading at 17 Rand 99 in South Africa. In Botswana, it's trading at 13 Pula 326. In Namibia, it is trading at 17 Namibian dollars 99. The Zambian kwacha is trading at 27 kwacha 197 to the US dollar. In Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 379. In Ethiopia, it is trading at 134 bir 859. In Uganda, it is trading at 3,000 shilling 630. In Tanzania, it is trading at 2,000 shilling 698. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,000 naira 590. In Egypt, the dollar is trading at 49 Egyptian pound 866. In Tunisia, it is trading at 2 dinar 982. In Algeria, it is trading at 131 dinar 87. In Morocco, the dollar will cost you 9 dirham 08. In Angola, the dollar is trading at 912 kwanza, while the Congolese franc is trading at 2,850 to the US dollar. Looking at commodities, gold is trading at $3,348 and platinum at $1,081 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $63.90 a barrel. Now, for any business news stories you would like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Nosipho Zuma.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And for your business of sport, here is Figile Lengwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. We begin with the business of sport in cricket. The International Cricket Council, ICC, has unveiled a massive prize money pool for the 2023-2025 edition for the ICC World Test Championship. The ICC World Test Championship final will be held from the 11th to the 15th of June 2025 at Lord's. The total prize pool for the WTC 2023 final stands at $5.76 million, more than double that of the previous two editions. The champions will walk away with $3.6 million, a significant jump from the $1.6 million awarded in both 2021 and 2023, while the runners-up will earn $2.16 million, up from $800,000. South Africa topped the World Test Championship 25 standings and became the first team to secure a spot in the final at Lord's, courtesy of series victories over Pakistan, West Indies, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, along with a drawn home series against India. And on to athletics in Kenya. Kenya's Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Youth Affairs, Creative Economy and Sports, Salim Vura, has received $460,000 sponsorship check from Absa Kenya's Consumer Banking Director Moses Matui and Marketing and Corporate Affairs Director Muihaki Wachira, with Athletics Kenya President Jackson Tuwei around. Absa Bank has invested $309,738 for the naming rights as well as planning and execution of the World Athletics Continental Tour Gold event. Entry fees are $2 for regular and $15 for VIP athletes. This is the 6th year of the Absa sponsorship. A total of 189 elite athletes are expected to showcase their athletics prowess during the 6th edition of the Absa Keep Kano Classic, scheduled for the 31st of May 2025 at Ulinzi Sports Complex in Kenya. Out of the 189 athletes taking part at the Classic, Ethiopia will field 31, while Kenya will field 53 in the national events and 59 in the core and discretionary events. The African contingent will be led by African record holder Ferdinand Omanyala, Liberian sprinter Joseph Van Boule, Olympic bronze medalist Abraham Kibowot, youngster Sarah Mora, Wiseman Mere, Julius Yego, and more. Some of the international athletes expected are Hammer Olympic champion Cameron Rogers Mujinga Kambuji, the indoor champion in Nanjing, javelin world champion Anderson Peters, three-time Olympic champion Anita Wodiazik, and Thomas Roller, among others. And in wheelchair sport, And the business of wheelchair, South African wheelchair tennis star Donald Padi admits that he struggled to adjust on the clay court in the first round of the 2025 Barcelona Open. This was after he endured a 6-3, 6-1 defeat against Brazil's Leandro Peña at the Real Club de Tennis. Wheelchair tennis has received sponsorship to assist players like Rampadi to compete in international tournaments. Wheelchair tennis sponsorships, particularly at the international level, is a crucial aspect of the sport's growth and development. Major sponsors like NEC and Uniqlo provide substantial financial support for tournaments and players' development. This support helps to increase the visibility of wheelchair tennis, raise prize money, and promote player development programs. Key aspects of the wheelchair tennis sponsorship, Uniqlo are major sponsors of the International Wheelchair Tour. Sponsorship can also fund player development programs such as the Grand Slam Player Development Program, which helps aspiring players improve their skills and compete at a higher level. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. This is Channel Africa Sport with me, Figile Lingwati.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa. The African perspective. From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It is exactly 4:38 Central African time as we turn our focus now to Tanzania and the G20. A dialogue on building consensus for South Africa's G20 Reigniting Africa's Renaissance took place in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania this morning. The dialogue was part of activities hosted ahead of the visit of the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, for his Africa Day lecture, which is scheduled to take place on Saturday. Now, to discuss some of the key takeaways from that session, we have on the line Sandile Shabalala from Huruma Bantu in Mbombela, South Africa. A very good afternoon to you. So welcome to Africa in Business.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what is it that stood out for you from the dialogue this morning? And what would you highlight as some of the key takeaways?
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me clearly. But I think what was really important for me was the roundtable today was about business and how business can play a role in accelerating Africa's development, but also really channeling the right resources and capital towards Africa's renewal and renaissance. As you know, former President Thabo Mbeki has been a critical part of the establishment of the African Union and reviving some of its very critical arms. And so some of the critical arms, I mean the organs that allow it to function and develop across the continent. But I think part of unlocking Africa's potential for prosperity has been really understanding some of the silent opportunities within the blue economy. So looking at how water and the ocean can play a critical role in unlocking new avenues for economic transformation, but also looking at cross-border transactions that can also facilitate greater involvement for young entrepreneurs across the continent to work together. And of course, this is in light of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. I think a lot of what I took out today was also a call for a greater infrastructure investment framework for Africa, where there could be collaboration for different governments and countries to work together in really giving a much more equalized way in which infrastructure can be balanced. In other words, other countries don't have to have more infrastructure than others, which can contribute to lesser migration of people from one country to another. So those were some of the key things that I took away from the various discussions today.
You mentioned youth in your response there in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area. How does the African continent make investments friendly to the youth, make them youth-centric?
I think it's very clear that there are many barriers to trade. And I think the barriers to trade isn't just only when the product is available for a young person to sell or to export or to even import. But I think it also really starts with the entrepreneurial mindsets of knowing that some of the goods that entrepreneurs across the continent create, the markets may not necessarily exist within those immediate communities or countries. So rather trying to seek across the continent where is one's good most needed, and really creating a mindset of being able to find those markets and then trying to really establish relationships that can allow you to enter those markets. So I think the biggest mindset shift is that when us young entrepreneurs create services or products, we need to also start looking at where can these products be better suitable in the continent for us to trade. And I think the free trade agreement really creates a platform in which there could be better tariffs and less bureaucracy for young people. And I think this is also quite effective because there is a protocol on youth and women within the Free Africa Trade Agreement that really allows for young people to be more proactive. But again, this is also about information. So it's about getting young people to understand how this works. It's about giving young people the understanding of what is foreign direct investment, but also what is South-South cooperation, but also what is regional integration within the continent as well, so that there's obviously trying to minimize language barriers, cultural barriers when there's economic activity. And I think what's also quite clear is that one of the panelists was asked about which are the sectors that have the potential for economic growth, and it was without a doubt that agriculture and energy remain to stand out as key areas where localization of goods can be realized, and a lot more can be done to achieve greater trade opportunities within those sectors.
And talking about the opportunities and the trade that can be brought within the various sectors, how, in your view, will the G20 summit bring investment to the continent?
I think it's very important to understand that the G20, which is the group of 20, is really not about South Africa's context and narrative and policy work. It's a global convening, and it's about driving global conversations, global narratives, but also shifting global power around matters that are critical to all the nations that are within the group of 20, as well as those that are invited. But I think what's quite significant for the purpose of this conversation is the fact that South Africa is the first country in Africa to host the G20, but also keeping in mind the African Union is also a member of the group of 20. So then this really does play a vital role in understanding the economic landscape of the continent. And I think South Africa needs to really work harder in not isolating the rest of the continent when it comes to discussing opportunities of business within Africa. I think for a long time, South Africa has had an unfortunate situation of being isolated by apartheid. But I think now we have the opportunity to really bring other African countries into our resourcefulness to the world. And I think there can be no greater effort in doing this rather than really creating more economic diplomacy in Africa by really opening doors for other African countries to play a much bigger role in the various meetings that will come up in G20. Of course, let me also mention the fact that there is Business 20, which is B20. And I think there needs to be a greater allocation for spaces in which African entrepreneurs, African established businesses, but also African reimagination of the economic landscape can find voice there, because this is an opportunity for us to tell the world as Africans that we are open for business, we are good for business, but we also have a very competitive advantage in the global affairs of economics.
And I love that you mentioned that, Sandile, because it goes straight into the next question that I really wanted to ask you about, as in how do we change the perception of Africa in general and change it to be a preferred investment destination?
I think that work really relies with us as Africans and how we treat each other. And it also has to do a lot with, this is not necessarily a far-fetched process. It's rather an opportunity for us to look inward and say, how are we integrating ourselves? How are we integrating our regions? If you look at East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, what is coherent amongst all these blocks and regions economically? And I think it's quite clear that there's a very strong culture of entrepreneurship. But I think another thing that's also quite important around perception is that most of Africa's economic activity is informal. There's many people that are driving business informally. And I think there's a work that needs to be done around recognizing that reality of informality and understanding how to better support that informality, because that will bring us closer together. It won't alienate people from formal economics, but rather it will make people that operate in informal economy to also understand that they also belong to a wider global economic activity, because money is something that circulates globally, and currencies are constantly trading amongst each other. So I think it's very important that the culture of entrepreneurship, the culture of working together, but also really us as Africans changing our own attitude towards each other, is really work that we need to do internally, because once we can achieve that, then the whole world can really feel that, you know, Africa is really, really, really strong and is quite competitive in how we do business with other countries. But as long as we don't get it right, other countries come in and take advantage of us. And I think that's what exactly colonialism did. And so we need to really decolonize ourselves, but also part of decolonizing is also regaining our own power. And that can only happen when we leverage of each other's strengths as a continent.
The dialogue was really ahead of the main event, or one of the main events, and this is in celebration of Africa Day, with the former president of South Africa, former President Thabo Mbeki. The lecture that he's going to be holding on Saturday. Talk to us about the significance of Africa Day and the significance of Thabo Mbeki being there in Dar es Salaam.
So as you know, Dar es Salaam plays a very, very important part of South Africa's history in many ways. The first one is the fact that when Nelson Mandela came out of prison, and I'm not sure if actually before he came out of prison, I think before he came out of prison, his first passport was given to him by Tanzania, because the South African government wouldn't do that at the time. So the Tanzania plays a critical part of our history and the liberation history. But more so, also there was also a lot of exiled South Africans that were in Tanzania, and some of them, gained military training, some of them gained intellectual training, some of them gained a lot of preparedness to lead the country. So there's also that political relationship we have with Tanzania. But another one is also understanding the fact that Dar es Salaam, or Tanzania itself as a whole country, plays a critical role in fostering peace across the continent. The East African Development Community is based here in Arusha, and that really makes the whole region quite an important diplomatic space for the continent. But more so, this lecture is very unique because, as you know, Thabo Mbeki has played a really, really important role in really promoting Africa's renaissance and its renewal. But I think this also brings a moment where, what does this mean for new generations? How do we look at our past and history, and what can we take that can propel us to create new solutions for the future? And I think part of the biggest things here is that there's a lot of thinking that takes place, a lot of dialogue takes place, but what is the action? And I think this lecture might really call into a lot of action. And of course, not to also take away the fact that there's a lot of conflicts happening. There's currently a lot of tensions happening within the continent. So then how do we create stability, peace, and also reflect a really in Africa that we want, that's out of debt, that's prosperous, that people have the dignity to live, sustainable lives, but also that young people feel that they belong here and they can create the continent of their future. So this lecture is quite momentous because there's also been a lot of elections happening in the past few months, and there's brought in new leaders into the continent. And so there's a whole lot of renewal that's really taking place democratically, but also what is the capacity as a continent that we have to really, really push the continent forward in a positive way.
And the fact that we have a shared heritage and a common story, there are touch points in different parts of our stories in the different countries of the African continent, and that so important to highlight as well on Africa Day. Thank you very much for your time, and wishing you all the best for the rest of your time there.
Thank you so much. Asante sana. Bye.
Asante sana. That's Sandile Shabalala from Huruma Bantu in Bombela, South Africa. He is talking to us today all the way from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, ahead of the lecture that is to be held by former South African President Thabo Mbeki on Africa Day. It's exactly 10 minutes to 5 p.m. Central African time. When we return in just a moment, our weekly business roundup with Victor Khomuswana.
Hello, Africa. We would love to hear your voice on our radio station. Be part of the fun and send a shout out or greeting message to your loved ones and your favorite Channel Africa presenters. Whether you're in Africa, the diaspora, or anywhere else around the globe, we want to hear your voice. Send your shout out message by sending an email to info@channelafrica.co.za or send them to our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. Help us diversify our sound with your voice. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
For our weekly business roundup, we joined on the line by Victor Khumusana, author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. Victor is also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communication at the University of Limpopo. A very good afternoon to you, Victor. So much happening this week as far as business on the continent is concerned. Welcome.
So much happening, Thami, and so much happening in the circus called the White House.
So let me ask you, Victor, your view and your perspective of that visit between the two presidents. Do you think South Africa got from it what they wanted? And from the United States perspective, were they successful in pushing their own agenda?
I only worry about somebody who's so powerful and reckless at the same time. President Trump should not run the United States. He doesn't have the discretion, the sophistication that are required to run that country. It's a shame that he was just willing to produce one media clip and this and then say, unfortunately, he runs the most powerful economy in the world, the biggest economy. So I think South Africa did well. You've got to negotiate. You are a small economy on the African continent. You need the U.S. You're exporting citrus, cars, textiles, and all sorts of things on special preferential treatment. So, yeah, being able to get an audience and not be humiliated because minus the opening session in front of the media, I think the discussions would have at least created more contact, not between South Africa and Donald Trump, but between South Africa and American business people, American politicians who might be a lot more sensible than the man at the helm.
All right. Said and done. We were all witnesses to that a couple of days ago. It certainly had the whole world on its toes. Let's take a look now at some of the stories that are also making headlines across the African continent. Rwanda. Rwandan borrowers are struggling amid their long-term credit crunch. Not easy days for them.
Not easy days. You know, with a small economy, a poor country like Rwanda, which is always punching above its weight, you know, the non-performing loans are a concern to the National Bank of Rwanda. And as a result, it has maintained a very cautious approach to lending, citing concerns over inflation and financial instability. And the economy is fast growing, at least that's the advantage. But with fast growth, Thami, as you know, often there's overheating that comes with that kind of high growth with reduced liquidity. Remember, the driver of the economy is tourism, is agriculture, so it doesn't always come with the relevant liquidity when it comes to foreign reserves, which is what often makes countries relax and get their monetary policy a lot more, shall I say, lenient. So borrowers are not able to access credit. People are coming in the villages, they are producing some food, but to expand, they need to be able to access credit. But with the bank still anxious about the fact that there's not enough liquidity in the country because the informal sector still dominates, it's going to be a long period yet. But as long as the economy is growing, I think eventually the pull side effects will be neutralized or moderated, and then the inflation will be coming down, and maybe the bank will start relaxing the lending rate. At the moment, if you are a bank in Rwanda, you're going to have it hard because you are going to be unable to sell with the credit being so expensive.
And talking about lending, the African Development Bank Fund has approved a $43.6 million financing instrument for Mozambique. What is that going to be channeled towards?
It's a 120 megawatt transmission line. You know, in electricity or in matters of energy, Thami, it's one thing to have the source of energy, and Africa has the variety in abundance. It's got solar, it's got hydro, it's got all sorts of renewable energy. But the problem is getting them from where you're generating to where the consumer is. And in this case, there's about 2 new 43-kilometer single circuit 66 kilowatt transmission lines that will be constructed is a form of the upgrade to create a lot more stable power delivery infrastructure. So it will cut to the carbon dioxide emissions, but in the end, it's good for the Southern African power pool because Mozambique has been experiencing problems due to climate change. The Kawarabasa Dam is undergoing some maintenance. The hydrological cycles are disrupting that. So the 33.2 million or so and 10 million sourced from the climate action window, as they call it, will be able to support low-income countries, including Mozambique. So it's as long as we keep adding to the grid, it will be a good idea. 332 gigawatt hours of clean wind energy is something not to sniff at.
And if time permits, we'll be able to go through our other stories. But here's one that I really would love us to talk about: the Chagos Islands and the United Kingdom. Maybe let's have a little bit of a historical context here about the Chagos Islands and where exactly they are. They are part of the Chagos archipelago on the central Indian Ocean.
Yeah, it's funny that this island was bought for $3 million in the year that I was born, 1968. And, colonialism has such a stinking history because the countries like the UK used to just be able to parcel out land and discuss. It was the initial period of 99 years. The islands, that was an initial period, operating a military base on one of the islands there. And, that is the influence of the UK and imperialism agenda. So they are going to be leasing a military base for about £101 million a year, but they have to hand it over to Mauritius because apart from just having been the belligerents of the colonial powers, there's no reason. The island is part of Mauritius. As you know, the Indian Ocean islands are never just one island, Thami. It will be many islands in one, as they call them. It will be the main island and the islets. So this is just one of them. But just like the UK was in the Falkland Islands, which was part of Argentina, and they fought a bitter war in the 70s and 80s over it, here it is. Luckily, they are not fighting this time, but the fact that they want to maintain a military base there tells you that they are looking to protect their interests in the Indian Ocean. Remember, that's where a lot of piracy happens, especially up north in the Somali waters. So there you have it, the undoing of the ugly, ugly history of colonialism.
And I mean, it really is a move that's been welcomed by other countries, including India as well. And we see Mauritius saying that this is the final step of the decolonization process for them. Victor Khomusano, always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Looking forward to what you've got in store for us for next week.
It's been a pleasure, Thami. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. You too. That's Victor Khomusano, author of Africa is Open for Business, as we wrap up our business for this week. And standing by, Julie Joël. Comme ça va?
Ça va bien, bonjour Thami, bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Restez connectés, tout à l'heure c'est Vue d'Afrique. On parlera de la RDC avec le Sénat qui a voté la levée des immunités de Joseph Kabila, mais aussi des avancées, mais aussi de grandes zones d'ombre du forum en Guinée, mais aussi pour les grands titres des activités prévues ce dimanche pour célébrer le 62e anniversaire de l'Union africaine, jadis OUA.